Welcome back, everyone. In this second part of our first week of lecture content, we will be exploring the structure of a research paper. To demonstrate the structure of a research paper, I've selected a research paper that I published, and it actually came out last week in print. So this research paper is entitled Virtually Trans, an Australian Facebook group supporting gender diverse adults, health and wellbeing, and it was published in Health Promotion International. Let's just take one step back. In order to access this journal article, I went to Google Scholar actually, and I input the first author's name, so my name there, and then what I remembered from the title of this piece, so Aidan Hours, Virtually Trans. It shall then bring up a link to the journal article, and I encourage you all to make sure that you can find this journal article, as there are a few questions in this lecture that pertain to the close reading of this article. Okay, so the structure of a research paper. It's important to understand the structure of a research paper so that you're able to navigate across research papers in an efficient way to ascertain whether they're of relevance to you and whether it's worth reading them in depth, because reading research papers takes time. So let's look at some of the defining features of a research paper. The first and most obvious perhaps is the title. So the title provides an informative, concise sentence summarizing the nature of research. So based on this title, we get an understanding that this is a study of an Australian Facebook group and that it has to do with the health and well-being of trans and gender diverse adults in this instance. The next thing that I often look at when reading academic peer-reviewed journal articles is the abstract, which confusingly in this instance is labelled summary. So some journal articles or some journals prefer to label this section, which is a very concise summary of the entire paper, as summary or abstract. But either way, they perform the same function, and that is that they provide a precise description of the entire paper and gives you, the reader, an overview of the paper. So enough detail to allow you to figure out if it's relevant to you and whether you should continue to read this paper. The next section of an academic peer-reviewed journal article is the introduction, and the introduction is typically quite long. So in this instance, I think it's perhaps 2,000 words. The introduction describes the research planning as well as providing a link between past and present understanding. It usually identifies any gaps in previous research that has led to the current hypothesis or attempts to strengthen current understandings. So in this introduction, I'll see if I can remember it. I wrote this over a year ago. So this research is about the experiences of trans and gender diverse adults in a secret Facebook group. So I begin by talking about social networking sites, of which Facebook is a paradigm example of. I talk about the utility of secret Facebook groups for trans and gender diverse adults, and then I reflect on some previous literature. So what other scholars have identified in terms of the benefit to health and well-being of participating in secret Facebook groups. I also highlight some research knowledge gaps in this particular section here that begins despite the utility of SNSs. Okay, moving on. After setting up kind of the rationale for why this research is being conducted, the next relevant subsection of an article is the materials or method subsection. So just as abstract is sometimes listed as summary, materials is also what is referred to as method in perhaps quantitative research. So the materials or method section provides a detailed explanation of how the study was conducted, with enough information to allow accurate replication by others. This section will include information on the research participants, any apparatus or tools used, and the procedure followed. So because this is a qualitative research paradigm with a vulnerable group, we start with a discussion of ethics. We then talk about the setting and the participants, so how the participants were sampled or recruited. Data collection, there's no specific apparatus or tool involved here other than a semi-structured list of interview questions, so that appears in the data collection subsection. There's also a discussion of analysis, so how was the data analysed? Because this is qualitative research and it's ethnographic, there's also a statement of trustworthiness. How do we know that we can trust the objectivity of the findings? The next major subsection of an academic journal article is often the results section. Though in this instance, because it is a qualitative research paper, it's referred to as findings. However, they're interchangeable, findings and results. So in this subsection, the authors present the findings of the research, highlighting particular points that are relevant or of interest. This section presents, summarizes, and analyzes the data, or original quotes from participants and description of analysis. So because this is qualitative research, we're dealing with narrative data. So what you see here is a listing of some direct quotes from participants, which are assumed under these major thematic categories. Because of the formatting style that I've employed here, which is APA, where a quote is particularly long, it's indented. So it's quite easy to identify where the direct quotes are from participants. There are some numbers that you might have observed here. So the numbers here are relating to age and also the total of the sample. This is the only numeric data provided in this example, which is, again, a qualitative piece of research. The next major subdivision of an article is the discussion, which comes after the presentation of results or findings. So the discussion, as the name suggests, discusses the results and relates them to the aim or hypothesis of the study. This section will see the authors consider if the results reflect what was expected, they relate results to previous research, and identify any flaws in the research design or implementation. And sometimes also the authors make suggestions for further research. So just on that note, so here I discuss the results relevant to previous studies of trans and gender diverse adults' experiences of social networking sites. I then talk about the strengths and limitations of this study. So what was particularly good about this study and what is a limitation? The end of an academic peer-reviewed article typically involves a listing of references. All literature referred to throughout the paper must be listed here with enough information for readers to access the same source. When I find a journal article that's particularly relevant to something I'm researching, I often look at the reference list of that particular paper to see whether there are other articles that I could read that could perhaps help expand my understanding of the knowledge or the content area. Now I'm just going to jump over to a slideshow to work through the remaining content of this lecture. Now there are 3 questions that I'd like you to work through in advance of next week's class, and they are on screen. So reflecting on that paper, Virtually Trans, what was the research question? So what was the question that the researchers were seeking to answer? The second question I'd like you to reflect upon is, was there a proposed hypothesis? If so, what was it? And the third question is, what was the method of data collection employed in this research? Okay, so that kind of concludes the section around orienting or navigating academic peer-reviewed articles and the structure of research articles.